Welcome to RSE for Grown-Ups. Come along with us as we walk you through the Relationships and Sex Education curriculum, otherwise known as RSE. We will be breaking the current curriculum down into manageable key stage chunks and topics.
This podcast is for parents, caregivers, or anyone in a supportive role with a young person. We will help you feel equipped for the highs and lows of growing up. If you're already listening, then it shows you are committed to supporting the important young people in your life. I'm Kelsie.
And I'm Sophie, and we are outreach workers at Luton Sexual Health. This podcast was funded by Public Health in Luton. Hello and welcome back to RSE for Grown-Ups. Today we will be exploring Key Stage 1, which is for 5 to 7-year-olds.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
So, Key Stage 1, 5 to 7-year-olds, and straight away all the conversations start with, what do you mean RSE, relationships and sex education for Key Stage 1s? So before we get into this any further, will you just tell us a little bit about why we're learning about RSE at Key Stage 1 and the sort of things that might include?
Yeah, so RSE for Key Stage 1 looks very much like thinking about yourself as a friend, thinking about yourself as a member of a family. What do different families look like? They may start drawing their families and exploring who other children have in their family setup and who's at home. It's very much based on what makes a loving, caring, kind, positive relationship and starting to recognise what those positive behaviours look like, and the foundations of a positive, healthy relationship going forward. But they're mainly thinking of themselves as a friend and a person within a family unit. And they, of course, start to learn about sort of the foundations of consent. So preempting consent, what's a boundary? When do we ask permission to do certain things? And that may not always be related to touch. That may be things at school, like, please may I borrow your pencil, please, can we play football? How to negotiate that as a friend and somebody, a little person at school.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think as well, we talk, we try and explain to teachers a lot that some of these big concepts that we're trying to teach young people are ladders. And where we might need them to get to by the end of their journey through education is the very top rung on the ladder. But actually, we're not going to reach the top rungs on the ladder until we start taking those very first baby steps and we start talking about those things. And I guess maybe the first steps of that we might discuss with parents come down to even before children start school or before they even get to having their first ever Key Stage 1 RSE lessons.
Yeah. And as somebody who has got, your daughter's just come out of Key Stage 1, hasn't she?
She's in Key Stage 2 now. Yeah.
What does that sort of look like? So let's think about before a little person starts school, so a little 5-year-old or a 4-year-old, before they start sort of learning about Key Stage 1 topics. What are they talking about at home? What are they being exposed to at home? What kind of questions are they asking? And also, what do they already know? Because let's also remember that children will have a variety of different experiences and will have already started exploring maybe some of those things at home with their parents and their caregivers. So what sort of questions have you been asked, or what sort of things happened before your little one started school?
So with my oldest, when he started school, he's now almost 13, but when he started school, I was pregnant with his little sister. So he was starting reception class in a situation of, wow, my mummy's got a baby in her tummy. Where did that baby come from? How's that baby going to get out of her tummy? All of those kind of things. So that was a really different experience with my younger daughter, who's just left Key Stage 2. She started school during lockdown. She was in school first day in COVID, and you just wave them off from the curbside, and there was no bringing them in and bringing their coats in and stuff. But she actually spent a lot more time at home and with family. So she was with us all the time through lockdown. So there was a lot of conversations that would have been happening in the home, basically sometimes around the fact that we didn't really have a lot of personal space. So actually conversations around things like periods might start way before your child enters school. I think there's probably a lot of mums that will have experience of the fact that their children don't leave them alone while they go to the bathroom.
They haven't quite got the concept of that's a private space maybe just yet.
No, exactly. That's why when we go to school and then we start teaching them about public and private, and then mums can say, yes, can you go out of the bathroom, please? It's private time. But actually, before you get there, you might get there why are you, why are you wearing a nappy conversation because you've got a sanitary towel or something like that. And I think that for me personally, I was very upfront with my children of, ladies have periods, something that happens once a month, and it is what it is. I think a lot of it starts with being quite matter of fact. So I don't think that either of my children would be shocked at any point during the curriculum to discover they were learning about a menstrual cycle, because it's something that, whether they understand it fully, there's sanitary towels or tampons in a bathroom and they know what they are and what they're for. I think that's one of the kind of things that our children can be aware of before they start school.
And they've already started maybe seeing different types of bodies at home. They may have started noticing hair in places.
And obviously like children that have got like a mum and a dad at home will be able to tell the difference between an adult
bodies,
an adult woman and an adult man's body. And one of the real first conversations we are starting to have with our children that is important, and it's important even when they're at nursery and they're very young, is like what we call our body parts, what we call our privates, all of those sorts of different things. And with my children, I really wanted to make the point that it doesn't really matter what people want to call it in day-to-day life, but they do know what a penis is, what a vagina is, what a vulva is. And we know it's important to know about, is it a vulva? Is it a vagina? Are we talking about the outside or the inside? And that might just come down to like, if a child's experiencing pain or discomfort, they have the vocabulary they need to describe that. Like,
so true.
Is it hurting on the inside? Is it itching on the inside?
Because we were
like
talking in the car, weren't we, on the way here, about how we did a session with some 15, 16-year-old lads, and they were all calling it their private parts. So we were like, it's really interesting that that's sort of something that's obviously been, that's the polite way of talking about their genitals. And we try and encourage them to say, no, you can use whatever language you want to use to describe it. You don't have to use that in front of an adult just because that's maybe what you think is like not rude, or like you're being kind or nice about it. Like, it's your genitals and we've all got them and you can describe them however you like. But like you said, it's super important, especially from like a safeguarding perspective, I think, at school. Like, so that they know exactly what their body parts are, because like, you know, we will talk about this a little bit more, but part of the curriculum, I guess, for Key Stage 1, a lot of young people will learn about the NSPCC pants rule, for example. That's a really big one in primary schools. In fact, whenever I go into primary school, there's normally like a board with the Pantosaurus and the different, you know, private parts are private. And that's kind of, I guess, a great key in, you know, for parents and caregivers, if they are slightly worried about what's on the Key Stage 1 curriculum, like to watch the NSPCC videos with their children or to start introducing them to them, because they are ways that we sort of gently introduce the ideas of consent and boundaries, and also reporting if somebody does touch you in your private parts or around your private parts, and you want to tell someone about it, and giving them the language to do so. Like, it is protecting them at the same time.
It is protecting them. And we do have the option to raise a generation of children that don't feel ashamed to say the names for their genitals. Like, they feel comfortable to say my penis, my vulva, my vagina, whatever they're referring to. And that's really important and really liberating.
Like, I just don't think it's good enough now if a teenager, for example, doesn't know the difference between their vulva and their vagina, because I wasn't privy to that information. Like, nobody ever discussed that with me. So I was still 24 and calling my vulva my vagina. And I just think, like, it's really important that kids know that. And like you said, it doesn't mean that you then have to use those words at home all the time. It doesn't mean that you have to use them all the time in school, even, like, whatever because often children will use what their parents have called it. So like willies or your mini.
Holly will say mini. So my little girl will always say my mini.
Exactly.
But she knows what it's called. She just, that isn't a word really that was that easy for her to say when she was really little. So mini just kind of stuck. And then, so we have willies and minis in our house generally.
And what sort of questions or topics of, like, did they start sort of asking before they went to school? Or even if they have started Key Stage 1 and they've started having some of these lessons, have there been any conversations that have then happened at home as a result of the lesson?
I think maybe another one from before school is definitely about body hair. I bet a few parents have had experience of standing in a swimming pool changing room or something of the like, and a child loudly announcing, why's your mini got hair on it? You're like, thanks everyone. Whole swimming pool's now aware of that.
Yeah.
But actually, we just say that's part of growing up. That's what happens when people get older, those kind of things. And then we get into the, like, where do babies come out of, and how do babies get in? And we talked about this a few times, and I have always been quite matter of fact with my children when it comes to it. So I would say, like, a person put their penis inside a vagina and a sperm comes out and it meets an egg and that makes a baby, and a baby comes out of a vagina.
Yeah.
Or a baby might come out of someone's tummy if they have an operation. And my cousin had a cesarean this last year. And that was actually a really good example for my children to learn about.
Yeah.
Oh, you were born this way. Some children are born this way. It's just another fact of how things happen.
Yeah.
I am frightfully aware of the fact that obviously I was pregnant with my daughter when my son started school. I told my son how babies are made and where she was going to come out of. And he went to school and told his friends. So you have to remember as well that it is parents' own personal choice how and when they tell their children the things they want to know. And with my son, I didn't say, you need to not go and tell other people this, because I didn't really think about it. And I was quite a young parent as well. I was just being matter of fact with my child. And that didn't go down necessarily that well with some other children's parents. But with my daughter, I am quite aware of telling her, like, this is information that we're sharing with you. This is conversations that we have at home. We can always talk about anything, but maybe some of these things are not a topic of conversation for school.
For the playground.
Yeah, for the
Guess what my mum told me last night. Yeah. And we also spoke about how potentially when you're having those conversations with your little one at home before they go to school, or as they've just started Key Stage 1 and they are asking those sorts of questions, especially if they have somebody pregnant at home, or like there is a baby, they're like, how has this baby arrived here? Yeah. Like that, I've just completely forgotten my point. What was I going to say?
I think we were just saying about, like, how we've got to prepare for the fact that not everyone's having the same conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
Just down to each individual family.
That's it. I was going to say that you don't, when you're talking to your, you know, when you were talking to your son or your daughter about it, you weren't mentioning the word sex. No. That was my point.
Yeah.
You weren't talking about what sex is. No. You weren't saying the things like, mummy and whoever have a special cuddle, or sometimes when adults really love each other and things like that, because also I think that ties really well into what they will be talking about at school in different types of families. Like lots of children may not be living with their biological parents. They may have grandparents as their main caregivers. They may be in foster care. They may come from a single parent household. So like sometimes explaining things like that can also throw up lots of conversations. I've definitely had one-to-ones where that information has not been very helpful for the young person in front of me, because maybe mum and dad aren't together anymore. Maybe they don't know who their dad is. Yeah. So like actually explaining it in a really scientific, biological way, like almost, we did say transactional.
Yeah,
we don't mean it to sound so cold, because obviously people can describe it however they want to their little one. But I do find that going from a science, biology perspective is really easy. You know, it's like, okay, they can understand all of the logistics of it. They understand body parts, and often then they don't have that many questions around it, because they don't have a concept of what sex is and what it means. So just
why people might have it for any reason other than to have a baby. And I think that's the really key thing, is that they don't know about a whole world of sex and relationships. They just want to know the biology of how a child is made. And I think that's really important. It's really interesting what you were saying about how families are made up. And actually that is, from my memory, one of the first activities that both of my children did as part of the RSE curriculum when they were in year 1. And they had to draw their family. Now, my daughter's got 2 mums. I'm married to a woman. So when my son and daughter have got 2 mums, leaving him out. I was just talking about her example of starting school. So when she started school, she had never been to nursery. She'd been through COVID and lockdown. She didn't really have any concept of what other people's families look like. And probably a lot of other people didn't have concept of what her family might look like. And that was a really good activity for them to be able to say, this is who lives in my house. And when we say about inclusivity in the RSE curriculum, we're not actually talking about young people learning. Some people have gay relationships, some people have straight relationships. We are talking about this person might have two mums, this person might have just a mum or just a dad, and that their families are worthy and deserving of love and respect. It isn't about them having to understand the intricacies of what that means. Just that is a family, and you just take that as it is and take it for what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And also like what we've talked about in terms of like having positive relationships, and we always talk a lot about safe adults, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Having a safe grown up, because we know not every child maybe has safe adults in their life or has never, hasn't got some of those like people around. So like to discuss families in that way is really important and really helpful. And also that is what we're not saying that when they go into Key Stage 1 that they will be learning how babies are made.
No.
They actually don't really learn about sex. They don't really they don't have it in science. They don't have that in health education. They're not really, learning about puberty or anything like that. So actually they are really just focusing on those relationships they have in life, how to keep themselves safe. And also if they are around people who maybe make them feel a certain way, or they are in a family unit which there is not very nice things happening or things that make them feel uncomfortable, that they are given the language to maybe tell someone about that, tell somebody at school about that, or start recognizing things at home that may not be appropriate or kind or nice.
I think that's it. It's really important. Like we wouldn't have safeguarding in schools if it wasn't for the fact that we understood that every child doesn't necessarily come from a healthy and happy home. And what the Key Stage 1 RSE curriculum can do is potentially highlight to young people that some of what they might see or hear or experience in their home is not necessarily an example of a healthy or good relationship. That people are demonstrating that they're not showing signs of consent or respect or trust or kindness. And that might actually be quite alarming for a young person who has lived in their own bubble and doesn't really understand that any family might function or operate differently to theirs, and what they're experiencing might make them feel nervous or feel. So it's really important that it doesn't just kind of talk about what is good, but actually what to do if you just feel a bit concerned about something. Because if you've only been in a home environment, you haven't been in a place where there are safe adults outside of your family, you do need to learn how to use that resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So when your daughter started Key Stage 1 and your son, we keep saying.
We'll talk about him when we talk about
Key Stage 3, so he's a lot older.
We'll talk about him. We might even invite him to come and have a conversation with us about some of this stuff. That could be quite interesting. But
And when your daughter started Key Stage 1, as a parent, were there any concerns that you had about what she was learning at school or what she may be exposed to? Were you worried about any of the content or how they were going to teach it, especially as someone who teaches it? What do what was your experience?
So actually when she started Key Stage 1, I was working in a different role. So I was teaching, but I wasn't teaching at RSE. And she actually went to school as a key worker child with only 3 children in her class while I was working as a teacher. So none of that kind of came remotely into my head to start with. And then it wasn't until she got into year 1 and they started talking about families. I think that my concern was never so much, I was never really worried about what they were learning. I have quite a good understanding of what's on the curriculum. My concern was how other people were going to react to her, sort of her normal. So her normal was, I've got my mum and my mama and my brother and my dog and my cat, like pretty average family. We're quite boring and normal, really, apart from the fact that she's got 2 mums. So to me, it was more, oh my gosh, how is this situation going to be handled in the school environment? Is that going to throw up any sort of other questions? And it didn't really. She's had a few other questions now that she's at the end of year, coming towards the end of year 3. But they were very accepting, and that was handled in a really nice way. And actually what I learned from that situation was she came home and said, my friend lives with their nanny and my friend lives with this person. And they'd really learned about each other's families and talked about who had what pets and all sorts of different things. And it didn't really seem to matter exactly like what the family unit looked like, but more the fact that they were celebrating who they were with. So I felt like I had real confidence, and I have real confidence in the lower school that she's at the moment. I don't know how I feel necessarily about all schools and as they grow up and move through the system, but I do have real confidence in the curriculum that they deliver in that kind of young age group, which is really nice.
And that just shows how important actually that stage, that topic, that chunk of the curriculum is.
Definitely.
Because it just, it eased your worries as a parent, but also meant that other children in the school also learned that a family setup is different, and that's why it exists on the curriculum.
Absolutely.
It's the foundation of just talking about, because I think lots of people fear that they'll sort of their children will be sexualized or make them grow up too soon. But they don't even encounter any of those subjects. And it's literally like you said, it's just a stepping stone for when they reach maybe like key stage 3, for example, for your son, where he maybe starts thinking of himself as a person who might potentially be in a relationship one day. And what sort of things does he want to look out for? And what sort of negative behaviors does he want to avoid? And who can he talk to about those things? Like, it will create sort of that a nice flow, I think, which really we didn't have.
No, certainly not.
And lots of people listening probably didn't have either.
Definitely. We didn't have the pants rule.
No, we didn't.
Either growing up. So pants rule is something that I certainly learned by my children going to school and coming and telling us about it. For any parents that don't know what the pants rule is and how that works, can you explain a bit more about it?
Yeah. So the pants rule is, I guess, a series of activities, videos, resources that a school can acquire. You can watch it on YouTube. I've watched it on YouTube. I've learnt the Makaton one a couple of times because they've got, a Makaton version as well for children who may have an additional need, or if you want to start teaching very young children, some of the pants rules. So it's PANTS stands for, and I have got my notebook down here in case I forget, but PANTS rule stands for private parts are private. That's the beginning. Your body belongs to you. So always your body belongs to you. No means no. Talk about secrets that upset you, and speak up. Someone can help. So that's what it stands for. And they will just learn, I guess it's like a little story about the Pantosaurus who's also learning with them, and they can watch videos of it. They can talk about what each of those points means. Yeah. And I find that when I do work with young children, because I do work a lot with, under 12s who maybe are exhibiting harmful sexual behavior, or who are starting to sort of, maybe they've been exposed to something that they need just some help trying to comprehend, put into context for them. Quite often I will refer to that rule and bring them back to that rule because it's something they have already learned. It's a really useful resource, I think, for parents also to know and to have. And I think a lot of people will know that that's something that schools use. I was just thinking as well in terms of like any other sort of activities or resources that we can recommend for parents who maybe have a key stage 1 child. I was thinking about the ways that we talk about things like consent and healthy relationships. And we've done quite a lot of work with children who they're more in key stage 2, but are also in key stage 1. And I found using things like, I would do appropriate touch with children. We start introducing that about how your body is yours, giving autonomy, you've got autonomy over your body. Just thinking about what type of touch is appropriate with the different people you have in your life, like exploring all those different relationships, who they are, who you like, who you love, who you don't really know, what sort of touch you would do with those different people, and like exploring it like that. We also do, how to describe different people in your family. We do the relationship circle. So you put the little person in the middle, who's the next ring around them, all the people that are very close to them. And then the next ring, who's sort of like, people at school further out, people that they don't know, people that they maybe don't like, or they don't have as much of a connection with. So like just really exploring, who they are as a person, what matters to them, who matters to them, and why some of those relationships maybe aren't working as well, or they're trying to navigate something. Like we do that a lot with friendships at schools.
I was actually just going to say, one of my favorite activities that you showed me that we do with some of the really young children is when we get out Lego or big bricks and we start making a friendship bridge. So we can have a little Lego minifigure or whatever character they choose on one side and one on the other side. And they need to build the bridge to help these two people become friends. And each brick they pick up and add into the bridge has to be something that you might do to become a good friend. And I think when children start school, they're so... sounds really a little bit of a mean thing to say, but when children start school, they're so like me. Like my parents give me attention. The world kind of is mine, especially if they're the youngest maybe in a household or whatever else, or an only child. They're just kind of quite used to being the center of things sometimes. And actually, how do we navigate how we change from being the center of our own little world into really caring about other people? And it's a really nice opportunity that they get this, and children won't necessarily know that they're in an RSE lesson. They won't be thinking, this is the set time where I'm supposed to learn about being a nice friend. But actually they might, it might be reactive. So there might be like an incident in the classroom and they'll sit down and have circle time and talk about like, how can we be kind to each other? How can we respect each other? All of those kind of conversations they build in. But I think that it's really important to remember that this isn't just like a stand at a chalkboard lesson with young people. And it isn't for us and it isn't for teachers either. I like doing an activity around boundaries where you're each your own little planet and you can put your arms out. Do you want your boundaries to be really big? I always put mine out as far as I can so they don't touch me. But some of the children might have little boundaries. And we kind of rotate around each other. We orbit around
each other, don't we?
And it has a really, it's really good at getting people to understand personal space and where they are in the world in relation to other people. Children don't really have much concept of that. They'll be like this close to you, talking to you.
Because that's the thing as well, isn't it? A lot of the time in Key Stage 1 and before Key Stage 1, like they know, I would say all of the children that we've come into contact with know their private parts are their private parts. And they know that area nobody can touch under any circumstance, but maybe don't always have a grasp of, okay, well, what does it mean if I hug my friend and don't let go? Can I kiss my friend on the cheek?
Can I chase them around the playground?
Can I play kiss chase? Can we grab each other? Like they maybe don't have all of those boundaries in place. And that's what we also do. You know, that's why those like activities and games are really important. And that's the sort of thing that they are going to be exploring in Key Stage 1. And I do recommend like doing it in that way to make it feel really like they are actually using their bodies in space. They're not just learning about it. Like the pants rules are a really good place to start, but it's like, how do you then build on from that? Yeah. And the good thing about the friendship bridge is that you can also explore what happens if one of the bricks isn't there. So if trust isn't there in a relationship, or if loyalty isn't there, or what does it mean if it's not very loving, or it's one-sided, and then the bridge collapses. And that's a really good like visual representation of how to navigate those little bumps in the road when it comes to making friends, resolving conflict. That's another big one I think on the curriculum, is how can children resolve conflict? Like they're going to start arguing, you can't play with me, I don't want you to play with me. They're going to start facing rejection. Like, I don't want you to sit next to me, or I don't want to be your friend today. Like that was a big one when I was at school. We're not friends today, we can be friends again tomorrow. That's
one I really don't get into. That is the one thing that as a parent especially with primary school, like Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 child, we're not friends. I'm not friends with this person today. They said that. And then the next day, this person's my best friend. Can I go to their house?
And like all of that is very normal. Like that is growing up. They're navigating being around other children 24/7, lots of different friendships, lots of different like boundaries and people like likes and dislikes and things like that. And how can we get them to do it, you know, in a way that is safe and respectful, but also like, it's okay to feel sad about that. It's okay that you're feeling sad about that today, but it's then not okay to like
hurt someone else because of that. You have to learn how to manage your own feelings.
You do. And like,
taking them out.
And face that rejection. That's hard. It's really hard.
It's really hard.
But very important that they learn how to deal with that now as a young person navigating friendships at school, in primary school, to when they're then in secondary school, maybe starting to navigate rejection as a teenager.
In dating, that can be a lot worse. I think that a lot of what we've talked about kind of covers what to expect with young people and primary school age children, key stage 1. Can you just give us any other things that we use something called the traffic light tool, which tells you about red, amber and green. So which green is normal behavior, amber is behavior to kind of keep an eye on. And if you see lots of incidences of amber behavior, it might be something you need to challenge. And then red behavior is something which should be classed as like age not age appropriate. So can you give us a few examples of what might be red, amber or green behaviors for the 5 to 7?
And I think we use this tool because we work with children displaying harmful sexual behavior, and quite often it's hard, isn't it? Especially now, I think, because children are exposed to so much so young because of the internet, because of the way the world is just so fast paced. So potentially at some point the traffic light tool will need to take that into consideration. But I would say that a green behavior for a 5 to 7 year old is starting to explore their own body. So they are going to start noticing their genitals, and they may be curious about other people's genitals. So they may start asking questions about other people's genitals. They may start like wanting to look at other people's genitals. They may start touching their own genitals. If they're doing it in a private space, that is a green behavior. They can't be doing it at school. They need to be doing it, in a private space, like in their bedroom. They might start fiddling. We say fiddling, but it's because it's just, that's what people used to say, isn't it? Always, they're always fiddling with, but they're just exploring their bodies, and they do might feel nice.
And they do. And I think like, I don't know, my kids will probably cringe if they ever watch this back and see that I said this, but like from a really young age, I'm like, wash your hands, go in your bedroom. Like if someone's got their hands down their pants or their knickers, that's absolutely fine. But like clean hands in your room.
Just redirect them to their room.
Redirection. And actually, parents are really uncomfortable. Parents can be really uncomfortable with their children fiddling around. Like
I know I said that and I just sounded like...
I think it's the only way we can describe it, because they're not doing anything. They
may not be purposely masturbating.
No, exactly.
They're just playing, and exploring. It feels nice, and it's maybe self-soothing and it's comforting.
Exactly. But if we don't redirect them, that they don't know that isn't appropriate touch or appropriate behavior.
Exactly.
So actually, if you can put a really firm boundary in, that's fine. In your room. Wash your hands.
So like, another green behavior might be that they start asking questions about where babies come from. They may start getting curious about pregnancy and how that happens and other people's relationships. Like they may start talking about having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or they may, be hugging and kissing each other on the playground, playing mummies. Like role play. Like that is very green. I think when that sort of behavior moves into amber is normally like if it's persistent and consistent. So potentially if a young person, I don't know, starts asking a lot of questions around how babies are made, or what adults do, or what this adult content is, or what this type of, I've had young people maybe explain very explicit kissing to me. And even when I've then told them that that's probably content that's been made for adults because they've watched a film or something like that, and they've seen a very intimate kissing scene, I've said that those films are appropriate for adults and that wouldn't be appropriate to kiss a family member or a friend like that. And they sort of have been like, I know. And then they continue to ask the questions, which maybe means maybe they're being exposed to more media, or, it could mean anything. So I think if they're persistent with their questions, even when they are told an answer, it's something to keep an eye on. If they are persistently kissing and touching and hugging peers without their consent, because like we've said, key stage 1, they will be learning that you have to ask before you touch someone. They will be starting to permission seek when hugging friends and holding hands with friends. Like that will just be a normal part of school and life. And
so it should be, I think. So what might be examples of red behavior, or what might cause a school to write to you and send a referral for some support, because you have done support with key stage 1 children? What necessarily would be a cause for alarm?
I think children touching other children's private parts, especially if they are doing it in secret. So if they are doing it in private places like the toilets, the bathrooms, and they've been told not to. So again, it's a persistent behavior that's repeating, but it's escalating because they're actually touching each other, like, mutual masturbation, things like that, inappropriate sexual contact with each other. I'm not going to say we don't see a lot of that.
No, we really
don't. But that is a red behaviour. I often get referrals for verging on amber red. We don't see a lot of those sorts of behaviours, but that is a red. That would be considered age inappropriate.
It's normal for children to want to play mummies and daddies, play families, but actually I've had schools contact because they're concerned that when the children want to play mummies and daddies, they want to try and lay on top of another child, things like that. So for us, that would be like potentially an amber behaviour, or if it was quite persistent, that would be a red.
Yeah, I think also children who are worried that they're pregnant or have a sexually transmitted infection, again, that is on the severe end, but that is a red behaviour. Somebody who knows stuff like that, or who is worried that they might, have contracted an STI or be pregnant. I was going to say as well about using sexual language. So this is a really tricky one because, again, slang is ever changing, and like lots of children, whether they're teenagers or little ones, like do use slang words because they've got social media or because someone at home uses it, an older sibling. Like they do use slang words for quite a lot of stuff. I think using sort of sexual terms, and they say like using it in art and play, so like role play, or maybe they're drawing or they're writing, if they are using that language persistently, or they are drawing sexual images persistently, I would say that's probably verging on, again, a red behaviour. It's just something that needs to be addressed. But quite often I find that if it's an orange behaviour and I go in and do some work around it, it's just because that's the only language they know. Again, going back to, that's why it's so important in Key Stage 1 that they learn and they know the appropriate words and the correct words and the right words, so they have a choice of which words to use. Quite often I've met teenagers who still, call it their dick or their cock because they don't know it's called a penis. Like, that's so important. So yeah, I think it's the traffic light tool is a really helpful tool. Again, it's like that ladder you were talking about at the beginning. It just helps you to see when might be a cause for concern. But also, we've got to be mindful that children are just exploring. They're allowed to be curious. And, a lot of the time it's potentially because they have been exposed to something that's not nice and not normal. Again, like a red behaviour is if a Key Stage 1 was watching pornography. Like that is a red behaviour and does need to be addressed. Again, it's not about creating shame around the fact that young person is watching porn, but it's explaining why it's not appropriate that they do, because it's made for adults. It's not made for you.
Excellent. No, they're really good points. And I think that it's really good for parents to be aware of stuff like touching is normal, curiosity is normal, all of those kind of things, and not to have fear in what their children are learning. And I think a really important thing I would like to share particularly about the Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 curriculum is if you're worried, go and speak to your children's class teacher. Most schools will have their resources available on their website. You'll be able to see what the curriculum entails. You can have a look at the national curriculum online. And schools will often even be able to provide parents with copies of like the worksheets that they're going to use, things like that. So if you do have any concerns, keep up to date with your child's lessons, but don't just hear RSE and panic. Because just give it a chance.
Give it a chance. Absolutely.
Because we are literally talking about the very beginnings and those little building blocks. Before we finish up for this week, can you think of any examples of questions that you might have been asked by a younger child, so a Key Stage 1 child, that might be one that a parent might struggle to answer, or a caregiver, a teacher might struggle to answer?
Oh, okay. I have to say, I haven't worked with tons of Key Stage 1, which is a good thing because they're not being referred to our service. We have worked with a lot of Key Stage 2, which we'll talk about. But Key Stage 1, okay, let's have a think. A lot of the questions I have had the question, where does a baby come from? How does that happen? I've had a lot of questions about actually, I've worked with some 7-year-olds who, again, they're in that stage where they are negotiating friendships and maybe are like, I've got a boyfriend, now I've got a girlfriend. Oh, I've got a girlfriend this week. Like, you know, that sort of behavior, which again, quite normal.
Yeah.
They have mainly asked like, but what do I do if they don't want to be friends with me? Or what do I do if they don't want to be my girlfriend anymore? Like, what that makes me feel sad. What am I meant to do with that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Big feelings.
Yeah. And like, I cried and that was really horrible. And they still don't want to be friends with me today. They still won't talk to me today.
Yeah.
So the main thing is, like you said, validate how that person feels. Oh, that sounds really awful. That sounds really sad. I'm sorry that happened. Of course you're upset. I would be upset if that happened to me. But we just go back to, I guess,
everyone has a choice.
Everyone has a choice, yeah. And I think that's really important that they know that. And although that feels really hard in the time, you know, that person just doesn't feel like playing with you today. And that's okay. That's their choice. That's up to them. Maybe there's someone else you could play with. We talk a lot about where to find friends safely and how to make friends, how to start some of those conversations. Because I think young people do find that quite hard.
I think grown-ups find that quite hard.
Yeah, I do. I don't make any new friends now.
No.
But especially because they are online a lot.
Yeah.
I think they do find it sometimes quite difficult to make some of those like face-to-face connections more. So I might just redirect the conversation. Well, that's okay. That person doesn't want to play with you today, or that person's just decided, because actually sometimes, you know, you have done something to upset them. And if they don't want to be mates, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
So what can we do next time? Or how can we maybe resolve the situation? Have you apologized? Have you said sorry? Do you understand how they must feel? Who else could you play with? Like giving other options rather than, there's like that thing of you don't have to win someone back.
Yes.
You don't have to try really hard to gain their friendship or, you know, that relationship again.
Not everybody has to be your friend.
No.
And that's a hard one to get your head around when you're very young.
Yeah.
But that's a really good example.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I think we're going to probably just about leave it there for Key Stage 1.
Yeah.
I think we've covered most of it. And I think it's really important just to say that, like I said, if parents have got any concerns, they can reach out to someone, they can ask. There isn't really a handbook. There isn't a guide for how we're doing this. So we're all just kind of like learning how to bring our kids up the best way possible together, working with our schools and with our communities and the people around us. So it's a good thing. It's a positive.
Yeah.
Okay, fab. So
thank you.
Next time, we are going to be talking about the Key Stage 2 curriculum. We're going to look at how that involves about science and the topics that might be covered there in comparison to in relationships and sex education. And we're going to start talking about puberty and the real tough bits of growing up.
Yeah, and how to answer very specific questions about body parts and what they may or may not do. Thank you.